At a family party, my grandma's head was shaved. My parents laughed until I revealed the truth. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. It happened at my grandma's 82nd birthday. My parents, Dean and Carla, threw a big family party at their home in Ohio. The backyard was full of music, smoke from the grill, and the smell of barbecue sauce. My brother Evan joked around with his friends while my parents bragged about him, just like always. I tried to enjoy it, but the air felt thick, like something was waiting to go wrong. When Grandma Edith arrived, everyone cheered. She was small and fragile, but still sharp and funny. She wore a bright blue scarf to match her eyes, and she hugged me first, whispering that I was the only one who ever called her just to talk. I could tell she was tired, but she smiled anyway. Later that evening, Evan called everyone to the patio. He said he had a surprise for Grandma. I thought maybe it was a cake or a gift. Instead, he sat her in a chair, pretending it was part of a game. Before anyone could stop him, one of his friends came up behind her with electric clippers and ran them straight across her head. The buzzing sound filled the air, and strands of her silver hair fell to the ground. The whole yard went silent for a second, then my parents started laughing. "Oh, come on, it's just a joke," my mom shouted. My dad slapped Evan on the back, proud of his sense of humor. But Grandma didn't move. Her hands shook as she reached for her head. Tears filled her eyes, and she looked straight at me. I felt something break inside me. I ran to her, shouting for them to stop, but they only laughed harder, saying I was too serious, that Grandma didn't even understand what was happening. I took her inside, away from the noise and the laughter. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding a handful of her hair, whispering, "Why would they do this?" I didn't have an answer. I just knew that whatever love I had left for that family started dying right then. The sound of laughter still floated from the backyard as I held Grandma close. Her shoulders trembled, and her breath came in short gasps. I could hear my mom's voice downstairs, telling everyone to relax, that it was just a bit of fun. The words made me sick. I wrapped a blanket around Grandma and guided her upstairs, away from the noise, into the guest room where the smell of old lavender still clung to the curtain. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The soft light from the lamp made the thin line of her scalp visible where her hair had been stripped away. I knelt in front of her, trying to meet her eyes, but she seemed far away, lost in a fog of shame and disbelief. Downstairs, the laughter started again. Someone turned the music back on. The sound of it burned through me. I wanted to scream, to make them see what they had done. Instead, I stayed there, brushing the stray bits of silver hair from her shoulders. "Grandma," I said quietly, "it's over now. You're safe up here." She nodded slowly but didn't speak. A tear rolled down her cheek, tracing the wrinkles that years of kindness had carved. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were clear but tired. "They don't know what I left behind, do they?" she whispered. I froze, not sure what she meant. Her tone wasn't angry. It was almost secretive, like she was talking about something only she remembered. "What do you mean?" I asked, but she just shook her head. "Some things," she said softly, "are better left forgotten, until they need to be remembered." I wanted to press her, to ask if she meant money, or maybe some old family story, but I could tell she was too shaken. She leaned back against the pillows, still holding that handful of hair, her breathing uneven. Outside the window, the lights from the yard flickered through the trees. I could still hear my parents laughing, celebrating whatever joke they thought they'd made. I sat beside her until the laughter faded into night. Something inside me shifted then, not anger yet, but the quiet beginning of it, curling deep and silent, waiting. A few days passed before I could bring myself to visit Grandma again. The image of her sitting on that bed wouldn't leave my mind. When I finally pulled into her driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered, leaning a little to one side like it was tired too. I found her in the kitchen, sipping tea from a chipped mug, her scalp covered by a soft knitted cap. She smiled when she saw me, but the light in her eyes had dimmed. We talked for a while about nothing, the weather, her garden, the stray cat that liked to nap on the porch. But when I asked how she'd been sleeping, her hand trembled on the cup. "I keep remembering things," she said quietly. "Things I tried to forget." Something in her tone made me uneasy. When she went to lie down, I wandered through the house, trying to shake off the heavy feeling. That's when I noticed the narrow attic stairs. The last time I'd been up there, I was a kid helping her hang Christmas lights. Dust coated the railing as I climbed. At the far end of the attic sat a cedar trunk, old and scratched, its brass lock dulled with age. I brushed my fingers over it. The initials EQ were carved faintly into the lid. I called out for Grandma, and after a few minutes, she appeared at the top of the stairs, breathing a little hard. Her eyes went to the trunk immediately. "I thought you got rid of this," I said. She shook her head slowly. "I couldn't." When I asked what was inside, she hesitated, then said, The truth, I suppose. She sat on an old stool, her voice soft. Years ago, I gave your parents money to save this house. It was supposed to be a loan just to help them. But they changed the papers, made it theirs, and left me with nothing. I couldn't speak. The weight of it sank into me like cold water. I didn't want to break the family apart, she added, her eyes filling. So I let it go. But that's what they took from me. Not the money, the choice to matter. I looked at the locked trunk again, feeling my pulse hammer in my throat. That night at the party hadn't been cruelty born of boredom. It was the proof of how little they'd ever respected her. And now, I could feel something sharper than grief growing inside me. I decided to visit my parents a few days later. The air outside their house felt different now, heavier, like every memory attached to it carried a bad taste. Still, I forced a smile when my mom opened the door. She seemed surprised but pleased, thinking I had finally moved on from the party. I told her I wanted to clear the air, to make things right for everyone's sake. Her face softened, but her eyes didn't. We sat in the living room where the walls were lined with family pictures. Most were of Evan, birthdays, graduations, trophies. My mom poured coffee, all sweet politeness, as if she hadn't laughed while Grandma cried. I brought up Grandma's name carefully, saying she seemed confused lately, that she'd been talking about money. Carla sighed and rolled her eyes. Oh, honey, you know how she gets. She's mixing things up again. She's not all there anymore. Her tone was calm, casual, like she was discussing the weather. Before I could answer, my dad came in from the garage. He looked relaxed, a beer in his hand, the same grin he wore at the party. If your grandma's talking about money again, he said, remind her she owes me for all the years I helped her. I kept her afloat. He laughed, taking a sip. She forgets who really saved her. The words hit me like a punch, but I kept my voice steady. I guess families forget things sometimes, I said lightly. They didn't notice the small recorder hidden in my pocket, catching every word. I let them talk, about how Grandma was difficult, about how she'd always played the victim. Each sentence peeled away what little illusion I'd been clinging to. When I left, my smile vanished the moment I reached my car. The recording felt hot in my hand, like it carried more weight than it should. That evening, I sat beside Grandma in her living room and told her what they'd said. Her expression didn't change at first. Then her eyes narrowed, sharp and focused in a way I hadn't seen before. She looked straight at me and said quietly, "They took my dignity once. Let's take theirs back." The calm in her voice made my skin prickle. It wasn't anger, it was purpose. And I realized she wasn't done fighting yet. I told my parents I wanted to make things right. The words came out smooth, practiced, the way a lie should sound when it needs to be believed. My mom clapped her hands, thrilled. "Finally," she said, "you're acting like part of the family again." My dad nodded in agreement, already talking about which wine to serve. They thought I was trying to fix what had been broken, but I was only preparing the table for something else entirely. Grandma sat across from me that night, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. Her voice was steady as we talked through every detail. "We'll do it here," I said. "A dinner. Everyone in one place." She nodded slowly. "Make it look like peace," she said. "They always fall for kindness." Over the next few days, I made calls and sent messages. My tone was light, friendly. I told my parents I wanted to apologize for how tense things had gotten. I even invited a few neighbors, people they cared about impressing. Dean loved that part. He always liked an audience. While they busied themselves with plans, Grandma and I worked in secret. The cedar trunk was finally open. Inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, were folders of bank statements, letters, and copies of documents I didn't fully understand at first. We sat side by side, reading through them. Her voice shook when she explained how the signatures had been changed, how promises had turned into traps. Each paper told a story of quiet betrayal that had stretched across years. One folder held a copy of her will, signed and stamped, and another, identical except for the handwriting that wasn't hers. My chest tightened as I traced the forged lines. "They never expected anyone to look this close," Grandma murmured. I spent evenings scanning pages, organizing everything neatly, making sure nothing could be denied. We decided what would be shown, what would be said, how the truth would unfold without warning. By the end of the week, invitations had gone out. Everyone accepted. My parents were so proud, talking about how nice it'll be to finally have the family together again. Grandma smiled when I told her. "They'll never see it coming," she whispered, and neither of us looked away. The evening before the dinner, I drove through steady rain to Grandma's house. The windows glowed faintly, soft yellow against the dark. Inside, the air smelled of chamomile and something faintly metallic, like rain on old tin. She was sitting in her armchair, wrapped in a pale blanket, her eyes distant as if she'd been waiting for me all night. "You shouldn't be out so late," she said, but her voice was thinner than usual. I sat beside her, noticing the papers we'd been working on spread across the table, edges curling from being handled too much. She smiled when she caught me looking. I keep checking to be sure it's all still there, she murmured. My mind's been playing tricks lately. Her words came slow, careful. I asked what she meant, and she hesitated before speaking again. The doctor says it's starting, the forgetting. Early dementia, they call it. The words hung between us. I didn't know what to say. She looked at her hands folded in her lap. I can already feel it, she whispered. Little things slipping away, names, moments, days. I felt something twist deep inside me. We'll handle it, I said quietly, but she shook her head. No, sweetheart. I'm not afraid of losing memories. I'm afraid of leaving without the truth being known. Her gaze lifted, steady and sharp. The money doesn't matter anymore. It's the lying. It's how they made me small. I just want them to look at me and finally see what they did. Her words carried a tired strength that made my throat tighten. I reached for her hand, and she squeezed mine weakly. You don't have to carry this alone, I said. She smiled faintly. I won't have to. You're the one who'll make them listen. The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, the rain eased to a soft drizzle. I sat with her until her eyes grew heavy, then gathered the papers into a neat stack. When I stood to leave, she looked up at me again, her voice barely above a whisper. Tomorrow, don't let them talk their way out of it. Make them face it. I nodded. As I closed the door behind me, the storm had passed, but the air still felt charged, like the world was holding its breath for what was coming. The house filled with the sound of voices and clinking dishes. Candles flickered across the long dining table, and everything looked perfect on the surface. My parents had gone all out, fresh flowers, polished silverware, the smell of roasted chicken drifting through the air. You'd never guess this night was built on lies. Everyone greeted one another with forced smile. I hugged them all, pretending warmth I didn't feel. My mom kept the conversation light, tossing out jokes that made people laugh out of politeness. When she mentioned old folks losing their hair, a few guests chuckled. I saw Grandma's hand tighten on her napkin, but she said nothing. My dad laughed the loudest, waving his glass. No harm in teasing, he said. Keeps the spirits young. I swallowed the bitterness that rose in my throat. Evan arrived late, loud as ever, boasting about his new job. My parents beamed at him, proud. I nodded, smiling when they looked my way. I was careful not to show the storm building behind my calm expression. The meal went on with laughter, stories, and too much wine. I waited until everyone had eaten, until the noise settled into a comfortable hum. Then I stood. Before dessert, I said lightly, I put something together for Grandma. Just a little surprise. My mom clapped her hands, delighted. Oh, how sweet, she said. The lights dimmed as I clicked the remote. The screen came to life. Pictures of Grandma through the years, smiling, holding us when we were children, laughing in old photographs. People smiled at first, charmed by the nostalgia. Then the slides changed. Images of documents filled the screen, bank statements, legal papers, two versions of a will side by side. Confused murmurs spread around the table. My mom's face went pale. My dad straightened, jaw tight. What is this? He demanded. I didn't answer. I clicked again. Their recorded voices filled the room. My mother's dismissive tone, my father's laughter, their words about Grandma owing them, about her forgetting things. The room froze. Every whisper, every breath stopped. The neighbors stared at their plates. Grandma sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the screen, expression unreadable. When the recording ended, there was nothing left but the hum of the projector. No one spoke. My parents sat rigid, trapped in the silence they had earned. Grandma turned her head slowly toward me, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "Good girl." My mother was the first to react. Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood, her face blotched red. "What are you doing?" she shouted. "Are you trying to destroy this family?" Her voice cracked, trembling between rage and panic. My father rose next, reaching for the projector. "That's enough," he barked, his calm tone gone. But when he stepped toward it, I moved faster, standing in his way. "Don't touch it," I said. My hands shook, but I didn't back down. He glared at me, eyes narrowing. "You've lost your mind, Mara. You think this makes you look noble? You're just embarrassing yourself." He grabbed for the cable, and I blocked him again. Around us, the room had gone silent except for the soft, embarrassed cough of someone trying to find a way out. A couple of neighbors rose quietly, murmuring excuses as they slipped toward the door. No one met anyone's eyes. The weight of what they'd just seen made the air feel thick. My mom's breathing grew uneven. "You twisted everything," she said. "You don't understand what we've done for her, what we've done for you." Evan stepped forward, his face tight with anger. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "You always have to make everything about you. You're turning into a drama queen. Mom and Dad have worked their whole lives, and you show up trying to ruin them with old paperwork and recordings." I didn't respond. I looked toward Grandma instead. She had remained still the whole time, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Then she stood slowly, her body trembling but her gaze clear. "Enough," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Everyone turned toward her. The tremor in her hands didn't match the strength in her tone. "You talk about family," she said, looking first at my father, then at my mother. "You took what I built. You forged my name. You laughed while I was losing everything I had. And when there was nothing left to take, you took my dignity too." No one spoke. The truth filled the room like heat, burning through every lie. Carla covered her mouth, sobbing. Dean stared at the floor. Evan muttered something under his breath, but didn't move. Grandma's voice softened as she looked around the table. "Now they all know who you really are," she said. Then she sat back down, her silence louder than any scream. The morning light crept through Grandma's curtains, soft and pale, as if the world itself was still deciding what to make of what had happened the night before. The house was quiet except for the sound of birds outside. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, trying to process the silence. Grandma was still asleep upstairs, her breathing even for the first time in days. My phone buzzed with messages. I didn't answer any of them, but the previews on the screen told me enough. News spreading faster than I expected. Someone who'd been at the dinner had already talked. In a town like ours, secrets never lasted a full sunrise. By noon, I drove through Main Street. The whispers followed me wherever I went. Outside the hardware store, two men stopped talking as I passed. At the cafe, people leaned closer to each other, murmuring. I caught words like forged, stolen, betrayal. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Dean's business partner, the one who'd known him for 20 years, walked away from their joint venture that same afternoon. I heard he'd cleared his office before lunch. Carla's social circle, the women she used to meet for brunch and gossip, went quiet. Her name vanished from the group chats and church committees she'd once ruled. Evan, always the golden child, stopped showing up anywhere. No calls, no visits. Just silence. I didn't feel triumphant. Watching it unravel felt strange, like seeing a storm pass that you knew you started. The truth had done its work without me needing to add a single word. I packed a few bags that evening and moved into Grandma's house. She didn't ask why. She just smiled faintly and said, "I was hoping you would." That night, I made her soup, and we sat together by the window. The town outside looked still, peaceful. She ate slowly, her hands no longer trembling. When she finished, she sighed softly. "I can rest now," she said. As I turned off the lights later, I looked at her sleeping face. The lines of worry that had marked her for years were finally fading. I felt a hollow ache, guilt mixed with calm. Revenge hadn't mended anything inside me, but it had given her back something priceless, her peace. Winter had settled over the town when Grandma's strength finally began to fade. The days grew slower, quieter, filled with the sound of the old clock ticking in the hallway. I spent most of my time beside her bed, reading aloud or just holding her hand while the snow gathered outside the windows. She didn't talk much anymore, but when she did, her words came clear and gentle, as if she'd made peace with everything that had happened. One afternoon, she reached for me, her fingers cool against my wrist. "Stay close," she whispered. I nodded, and she smiled faintly. That evening, as the light dimmed, she slipped away as quietly as she lived, her hand still resting in mine. There were no final speeches, no dramatic moments, just stillness and a strange calm that filled the room. The funeral came a few days later. The church was small and cold, filled with murmurs and the smell of lilies. Dean and Carla stood near the front, pale and stiff, avoiding the stares of neighbors who knew too much. When the service ended, they turned toward me, their faces heavy with something between guilt and pride. Carla tried to speak, her voice uncertain. I met her eyes once, then turned and walked past them, the sound of her breath catching behind me. There was nothing left to say. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in Grandma's house. The quiet pressed around me like a blanket. On her nightstand lay an envelope with my name in her careful handwriting. Inside was a short letter, written on her favorite stationery. "You gave me back my voice," it said. "That's all I ever wanted." My hands trembled as I folded the paper back into the envelope. I went to the attic, the scent of cedar still faint in the air, and opened the old trunk one last time. I placed the letter inside and locked it, the click echoing softly through the empty space. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel broken either. Standing there, I realized I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd only shown what was already ruined. When the house grew dark, I sat by the window and finally let the tears come, not from sorrow, but from the quiet release of carrying the truth to its end. Hey besties, thanks for staying till the end of this emotional story. Imagine watching your own parents laugh while your grandma's dignity was torn away, only to uncover years of hidden betrayal. Painful, right? But sometimes the truth burns brighter than revenge. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more real, heart-gripping tales. See you in the next one. Bye.